Climate in 2 minutes.
In this episode of Climate in 2 minutes, we will be talking about the global response on climate change through international policies and treaties.
Since world leaders and scientists realize that climate change is an issue that needs urgent and collective action, policies and programs on climate change have been enacted. These policies are put in place to limit the global emissions, preserve ecosystems, and monitor the effectiveness of our efforts. The threat of climate change is being addressed globally by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or UNFCCC. The long-term objective is to stabilize atmospheric greenhouse gas concentrations at a level that would prevent dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system.
In response to a growing need for a legally binding deal with clear quantitative targets on reducing carbon emissions, 195 nations adopted the Paris Climate Change Agreement at COP21.
The Paris Agreement entered into force where 195 countries agreed to limit the global temperature rise to 2 degrees Celsius. Countries have deposited their instruments of ratification, acceptance, approval, or accession with the depositary. Countries representing 99% of global emissions have submitted their nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, as part of their commitment to the agreement. NDC is a document submitted by countries identifying their emission reduction contributions, targets, and ambitions.
It was clear how addressing environment and climate change issues affect nations' development in the long term. The Sendai framework was developed in 2015, identifying the linkage between climate change and disasters. Climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction go hand in hand in reducing vulnerabilities and enhancing climate resilience of countries.
The Sendai framework covers 3 principles. 1. Understanding climate risk through vulnerability and risk assessment and risk data. 2. Strengthening disaster governance through policies and capacity development. And 3. Enhancing disaster preparedness for effective response recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction through policies, planning, and financing mechanisms. In 2016, the United Nations, or the UN, identified 17 Sustainable Development Goals as a universal call to action to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure that by 2030, all people enjoy peace and prosperity. Sustainable Development Goal 13 focused on taking urgent action to combat climate change. Its targets include strengthening resilience and adaptive capacity to natural disasters, building knowledge and capacity on climate change, integrate climate change in policies and planning, promote mechanisms to raise capacity for planning and management, and implement the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change.
Catch our next episode of Climate in 2 minutes to learn how our country is living up to its commitment to the Paris Agreement and how our governments are addressing climate change.